Hi, my name is Arthur, and it seems to me that on YouTube and political pundits on TV shows have talked a lot about the government going broke, or the government not being able to pay all of its expenses. So it seemed necessary to create this video in order to show people the difference between household spending and government spending. Here is one example from Fox News that perfectly lays out the general ideology when people compare governments to households. Take a look.
But I don't see any easy way out, because when a country or an individual is broke, they're supposed to quit spending money, and they're supposed to pay off their bills.
There's a bankruptcy in our future. Our national debt is at $12 trillion. The expectation is it'll be $19 trillion at the end of the president's first term. That's 3 years, a little less from now. We have probably $35 to $50 trillion in unfunded liabilities for Medicare and Social Security. No clue where that money's going to come from. How long before this country goes belly up, and what form will it take, do you think, when we roll over?
Well, that's a big question, and if we don't clean up our act, it can be very bad, very dangerous, and political chaos could ensue.
So they seem to be comparing the financing methods of households to the financing methods of governments, which is not a fair comparison, as we'll find out. But before we understand how governments work, we need to understand quickly how households work. Households, like you and I or a business, receive a certain amount of income or funds through selling products or providing services. Then they can use that money to pay off bills, debts, or spend things. When they don't have enough income or enough funds, they simply cannot buy more things. They can go into debt, but eventually they will have to pay that debt off. So households have to have less spending than they do income or funds. Now, the very surprising thing to most people is that this is not the same as governments. In order to understand the difference between household cash flows and government cash flows, we need to understand one term called monetary sovereignty. The actual definition of monetary sovereignty can be found in the description below, but essentially it is a sovereign government that is able to issue something called a fiat currency, which is just a fancy word for saying that their currency is not convertible to anything, not convertible to gold or another currency. This means that they have the sole issuance, they are the monopoly supplier of that currency. This is important because it means that they can print as much of that currency as they want, never having to exchange it for anything other than the absolvency of taxes. A monetarily sovereign government can financially spend as much as it wants. There's no issue with printing more money. It can always do that. However, there are two real resource problems with spending in excess of money. The first is inflation, and the second is waste. If we print out $100 million today, and we spend it on goods and services across the nation, the first risk is inflationary pressures. That just means that if we spend that money just on things that are already being produced, instead of increasing productive capacities, trying to increase the efficiency of factories, or employing more people, then this money will go to raising prices instead of creating a more efficient economy. The second potential risk is waste. Now, we could print $200 million tomorrow, and we could use that to build a second Golden Gate Bridge right next to the first. And the day after, we could print $300 billion more and make a third Golden Gate Bridge next to the first two. However, this really wouldn't increase commuting efficiency of people in San Francisco by that much, and it would cost so much that it really wouldn't be worth it. So we can say that spending more money is financially sustainable because we're monetarily sovereign, but because it might go to pushing up prices instead of increasing productive capacities, and because it might go to unnecessary productive capacities, it's not always good to spend more money. In general, however, outside of the risk of inflation and waste, government spending is a very good thing for the economy. It increases consumption, it increases production, it increases employment. We may move closer to the goal of full employment. And that means that we increase everybody's income and that the general well-being of our population is increasing. So as long as we're not experiencing inflationary pressures and we're not wasting our money, spending more than we earn is not necessarily a bad thing. Now that we understand that there are no financial restraints, but two real restraints of government spending, we have to understand how a government actually receives the funds to spend. The government has three ways of receiving funds, unlike a household that only has one. The first is taxes, the second is bond issuance, and the third is monetary issuance. We're going to break down each one of these through the lens of understanding that we are in a monetarily sovereign government. The first, taxes, is considered the most virtuous way of receiving funds for the government. The second way to earn funds for the government is through bond issuance, or taking out loans from the people. These are also called treasuries. Now, bonds have two general critiques. First, that they crowd out private investment. The idea of crowding out comes from the quantity theory of money, and it states that banks have a certain amount of excess reserves in the system that they lend out to individuals. And that when a government wants to borrow money, it goes directly to those sources of money, takes some of the excess reserves, spends it, and then pays it back eventually, usually with taxes. However, that's not how the banking system works. Excess reserves is an antiquated theory. In reality, banks simply issue loans regardless of how many reserves are in the system. They issue loans before they get reserves. Reserves are in fact a residual variable from loans. Reserves come after loans have been issued. So governments can borrow as much money from the people as they want, and banks will still issue a ton of loans, and it will not affect their loan issuance at all. The second critique of bond issuance is that it is a burden for future generations. That means that we will have to pay back bond loans that we take out now with taxes in the future. However, that will never happen because we will simply issue more bonds or take out more loans in order to pay back the old loans. We will never, ever pay off our debt. The third way that our government can earn funds is through monetary issuance. This is a fancy way of saying simply printing more money. Now, they can also simply enter in zeros into bank accounts of banks, but for the purpose of this video, we will just focus on printing money. The government has printing presses, like I showed before, and they can print an unlimited amount of money with these because they're the sole issuer of this currency. Most political pundits say that monetary issuance will cause a rise in prices or inflation, but that's not necessarily true. That is only true if we spend money on non-productive capacities or we don't employ more people. As long as we increase the efficiency of the economy or we move closer to full employment, all of the monetary issuance that happens will go to an increase in production rather than an increase in prices. So all we have to know is what the state of the economy is in. If we are close to full employment, it is not a good idea to have large amounts of monetary issuance. If we are far from full employment, it is a very, very good idea to have large amounts of monetary issuance. So taxes, bond issuance, and monetary issuance are the three ways that a government can earn funds. However, none of those ways is worse or better than the other. Spending is spending is spending, which means that it doesn't matter how we earn the funds, it matters how much we spend. Like I said before, spending is fantastic for an economy if we have ways to increase productive capacities, employ more people, and that we're not going to be wasteful with our spending. So the next time you hear a political pundit say something like this,
But I don't see any easy way out, because when a country or an individual is broke, they're supposed to quit spending money, and they're supposed to pay off their bills.
Make sure that you let them know that households and governments are very different in terms of spending. Households have to earn more or equal to the amount that they spend. However, because governments are monetarily sovereign, as long as they avoid inflation and waste, it doesn't matter if we earn funds through taxes, bond issuance, or monetary issuance. It is simply the total amount of money that we spend that is something that we have to pay attention to. Now, I hope that you feel a little bit more educated about the difference between household spending and government spending. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of your day.